She walked for miles under a raging storm, soaked to the bone, chasing the smallest hope of a better life. She had no umbrella, no money for a bus, just one dream, and a job interview. What she didn't know was that her courage wouldn't just open a door, it would unlock a legacy. But at what cost? The sky cracked open with thunder as Emily tightened her coat around her thin body. Rain poured like it had a grudge against the world, and the wind slapped her face with each step. Her shoes, already falling apart, squished with water. But she kept walking. Because this wasn't just a job interview, it was her chance to finally leave behind the echoes of an empty fridge and the silence of unpaid bills. The morning had started like any other, with a weak cup of instant coffee and a prayer whispered through trembling lips. She had found the job posting 2 days earlier, scribbled on a wrinkled flyer stuck to a grocery store window. Receptionist wanted. Professional environment. Immediate start. The address led to a tall building downtown, miles away from her tiny rented room on the edge of the city. Emily didn't own a car. Her last $2 had gone into printing her resume. She couldn't afford the bus fare, and with no friends nearby and no family left to ask, walking was her only option. The storm hit halfway through her journey. She almost turned back. But something inside her, maybe pride, maybe desperation, refused to let her quit. As she reached the building, the automatic glass doors opened with a whoosh. People turned their heads as she stepped inside, drenched and dripping, her hair clinging to her face, her clothes sticking to her skin. The marble floors reflected her shame like a mirror, but she lifted her chin. A young receptionist, polished and perfectly manicured, raised an eyebrow in disgust. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Emily handed her the soaked resume, which had nearly disintegrated in her bag. The girl rolled her eyes. "Wait over there," she said, pointing to a corner far from the other candidates. Emily sat alone, shivering, water pooling at her feet. The others, dressed in crisp suits and heels, whispered among themselves, casting glances at the girl who looked like she'd crawled out of a gutter. No one offered her a towel. No one asked if she was okay. What none of them knew was that someone upstairs was watching. From a high floor behind tinted glass, an old man in a tailored suit stood with his hands clasped behind his back. His name was Arthur Whitmore, founder and CEO of the company. But today he wasn't looking at quarterly reports. He was watching a girl walk through a storm. He didn't know her name yet, but something about her caught him. The way she sat with her shoulders straight despite her misery. The way she refused to hide. He had seen hundreds of candidates come and go. But this one was different. And for reasons even he didn't understand yet. He couldn't look away. The room smelled like expensive perfume and polished wood. Emily sat stiffly, trying to dry her hands on her soaked skirt without looking too desperate. Her heart pounded, not just from the cold, but from fear. Fear that this, like so many things in her life, would slip right through her fingers. "Emily Carter," the receptionist finally called out, her voice loud and sharp enough to draw more stares. Emily stood, wiping her face with a tissue from her pocket, and walked toward the elevator with soaked shoes squeaking on the floor. The ride up was silent. A suited man from HR didn't bother to look at her as he led her to a glass-walled office on the 10th floor. "Wait here," he said, not even offering a seat. She stood there for several long minutes, watching the storm continue to rage outside, wondering if she should have stayed home. But something about the way she had gotten here, the storm, the stairs, the shame, made her feel like leaving now would mean everything had been for nothing. When the door finally opened, she was greeted not by a manager, but by a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a clipboard. "You're quite wet," the woman said, as if surprised Emily didn't have a personal driver or an umbrella that cost more than a month's rent. "I apologize," Emily said, trying to smile. "I walked here." The woman blinked, clearly thrown off. "You walked? In this weather?" I didn't have another way, Emily replied, her voice soft but firm. The woman didn't respond right away. She just scribbled something down, and Emily had no idea if it was a strike against her or a note of admiration. The interview began with the usual questions: experience, strengths, weaknesses. Emily answered the best she could, but her resume was thin. She had worked as a cashier, a cleaner, and most recently, a night shift caregiver for an elderly woman who had since passed away. None of it seemed impressive on paper. But Emily had something most candidates didn't: a quiet dignity and a strength built from surviving years of hardship. She didn't know how to impress with words, but her eyes told a story of perseverance. Still, the woman with the clipboard seemed unimpressed. "You know this is a high-end company, right?" the woman asked bluntly. "We expect a certain presence from our staff." Emily nodded. "I may not look like much today," she said, "but I show up, always." It wasn't rehearsed, it wasn't polished. But in another room, just behind a wall of glass, Arthur Whitmore heard every word, and for the first time in a long while, he smiled. Arthur Whitmore stood behind the tinted glass, his hands clasped loosely behind his back. He had built an empire over 5 decades, one that dealt in luxury, elegance, and perfection. But the older he got, the more he craved something money couldn't buy: truth. And what he had just seen in Emily wasn't something you find in resumes or designer suits. His assistant, a younger man named David, stood beside him, watching the same scene unfold. "Should I have her removed?" he asked. "She's clearly not a good fit." Arthur didn't answer right away. His eyes remained fixed on the fragile-looking girl sitting in that cold chair like she belonged there, despite everything around her saying she didn't. "No," he finally said. "Let her finish." David looked confused but nodded. He knew better than to question the old man's instincts. Arthur wasn't just a businessman, he was a strategist, one who had built fortunes by seeing what others overlooked. And right now, he was watching a gamble take shape. Later that afternoon, Arthur called his head of human resources into his office. "Who approved this round of hiring?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. The woman from the interview, Ms. Delaney, looked surprised. "I did, sir. We screened over 200 applicants." "That young woman shouldn't have even—" Arthur raised a hand to stop her. "That young woman walked 5 miles in a thunderstorm for a job that barely pays minimum wage. She sat drenched in front of your entire staff and didn't flinch. Tell me, Delaney, how many of your hires would have done the same?" Delaney shifted uncomfortably. "With all due respect, sir, she doesn't belong here." Arthur leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Maybe she doesn't. Or maybe she belongs more than any of us." Delaney left the room speechless, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. Arthur turned back to the window. Outside, the storm was beginning to clear, but inside him, something new was stirring. A quiet fire, an echo of a younger man who once stood in worn shoes, begging for someone to give him a chance. He picked up his phone and made a single call. "Keep her name on file," he said. "I want to see what she does when no one's watching." And because Arthur Whitmore wasn't just watching a girl walk through the rain, he was watching the future unfold. Chapter 4. The truth behind the interview. 3 days passed without a single call. Emily stared at her phone constantly, hoping it would light up. But it stayed dark, just like her mood. She began to doubt herself, wondering if the walk through the storm had been foolish, if maybe they had laughed at her the moment she left the building. She went back to her routine, scraping by with cleaning gigs, eating whatever was cheapest at the corner store, and sleeping in a room where the heater barely worked. Her shoes were still damp. Her hopes were even worse. Then, on the 4th morning, her phone rang. "Miss Carter," the voice asked, "we'd like you to return for a follow-up interview. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. sharp." She barely had time to respond before the call ended. When she returned to the building, things already felt different. The receptionist, who had mocked her before, was now strangely quiet. No eye rolls, no smirks. She just pointed to the elevator and said, "Top floor." Emily's heart pounded. Top floor. As the elevator doors slid open, she stepped into a lobby she hadn't seen before, warm, polished, and filled with sunlight. A young woman greeted her with a gentle smile and offered her tea. "Mr. Whitmore will see you shortly." The name hit her like thunder. Mr. Whitmore? She knew the name. Everyone did. The founder, the CEO, the man behind the empire. Why would he want to speak to her? She sat, nerves burning, until a door opened and the woman nodded. "He's ready." Inside, the office was filled with history, old photos, thick books, maps of the company's growth. And behind the desk sat Arthur Whitmore, older than she expected, with a soft voice and sharp eyes. "You walked through a storm," he said, not offering a handshake. "Why?" Emily hesitated. "Because I needed the job." "No one told you it was a real interview," he said. She blinked. "What?" Arthur leaned forward, folding his hands. "It wasn't. Not really. It was a test, a social experiment, you might say. We wanted to see how far people would go for a job that seemed beneath them." Her mouth went dry. "So, it was fake?" "Not for you," he said. "For you, it's just beginning." And in that moment, Emily understood. She hadn't stumbled into an interview. She had walked straight into a world she never imagined. And someone had just opened the door wider. Emily left the office with her head spinning. The elevator ride down felt surreal, like she was floating through a dream that didn't quite make sense. A fake interview, a test. And now the most powerful man in the building wanted to see what she'd do next. None of it added up. And yet, she couldn't deny the flicker of hope it sparked deep inside her. When she stepped outside, the sun was out for the first time in days. The rain had washed the city clean, but Emily still felt like she was covered in questions. She didn't tell anyone about the meeting. Who would even believe her? The next morning, an envelope slid under her door. No postage, no markings. Inside was a single piece of paper. "Report to 485 Monroe Street, 6 a.m. Wear comfortable shoes. A.W." Emily didn't sleep that night. She arrived early, nervous but curious. The address led her to a plain brick building with no sign. Inside, a group of people bustled around: janitors, maintenance crews, cafeteria workers. A woman in a grey uniform handed her a mop and pointed to a corner. "Start with the back hallway." No explanations, no introductions, just work. Emily didn't complain. She scrubbed floors, cleaned restrooms, hauled trash for hours. No one treated her like a guest. She wasn't in a corporate tower anymore. She was invisible again, just the way the world liked it. But what no one knew was that Arthur Whitmore had cameras installed throughout the building, not for security, for observation. And he watched her. How she spoke to the older janitor who struggled with his back, how she helped a lunch lady carry boxes, how she kept working even after her hands blistered. At noon, a man brought her lunch, a sandwich, an apple, and a bottle of water. No words, just a nod. By the end of the day, Emily was exhausted. She changed out of the uniform and stepped outside, not sure if she had passed or failed some invisible test. Then her phone buzzed. A text. "You're not done yet. Tomorrow, same time." She stared at the screen. Her instincts told her to walk away, that something strange was happening, that she was being used. But another voice, and quieter, older, wiser, whispered, "Stay. You've come this far." And for the first time in a long time, Emily chose to believe in something she couldn't explain. Hope. By her third day at the brick building, Emily had started to fall into a rhythm. Wake up at dawn, walk the chilly blocks in silence, clean floors, carry boxes, avoid eye contact. She wasn't sure if it was punishment or preparation, But she showed up without fail. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't corporate, but it was honest. That morning, she noticed something different. One of the older janitors, a quiet man named Carl, wasn't there. He usually arrived first, humming hymns under his breath and moving slowly with a limp. But that day, someone else was cleaning his section. Emily asked about him during lunch. "Old Carl slipped down some steps last night," a kitchen worker said, shaking her head. "Tried to come in anyway, but they sent him home. He lives on the east side. Rough shape, they say." That evening, after her shift, Emily rode 2 buses and walked another mile to find his building, an aging complex with no elevator. Carl lived on the 3rd floor. She knocked softly. When he opened the door, the surprise on his face was genuine. "Emily, what in the world are you doing here?" She held up a small bag of groceries and a bottle of ointment. "You helped me with that broken vacuum. Figured I could return the favor." Carl's eyes softened. "Nobody ever checks on me, sweetheart. Not even my kids." She didn't stay long, just enough to drop off the bag, help him tidy up a little, and make him promise to rest. When she left, she didn't think much of it. It was just a small thing, something anyone should do. But someone had been watching. Arthur Whitmore had never expected her to go that far. He had planted the story about Carl's fall, a whisper, a test. But he never imagined she'd track him down on her own time, with her own money, when she had so little of either. He watched the footage from the front of Carl's building, grainy, black and white. Emily holding the grocery bag close to her chest like it was something sacred, a look of quiet determination on her face. Arthur leaned back in his chair, moved in a way he hadn't been in years. Not because she had done something big, but because in a world where everyone chases the spotlight, she had shown true character in the dark. And that changed everything. The following Monday, Emily returned to 485 Monroe as usual. She didn't expect anything different. No congratulations, no thank you. Just the same mop, the same hallways, the same silence. But this time, when she entered the building, something was off. The woman who usually handed her the cleaning supplies looked at her differently, not with pity or annoyance, but with respect. It unsettled Emily. People like her didn't earn respect in places like this, not without earning every drop of it through blood, sweat, and pain. By noon, instead of her usual duties, she was called into a small office she had never seen before. A young assistant greeted her. "Mr. Whitmore would like to see you," he said plainly. She swallowed hard. This was the second time his name had entered her world. The first had shaken her. This time, it sent her heart racing. She followed the assistant into an elevator, but instead of going up to the penthouse suite like before, they went deeper, into the building's lower levels, where the original foundations of the company still stood, untouched by renovations. The hallway smelled like old wood and leather. She was led into a quiet room filled with books, a fireplace burning low, and large windows that showed a private garden beyond. Arthur Whitmore sat in a worn leather chair, a wool blanket draped over his knees. He didn't look powerful. He looked tired, human, real. Emily stood in silence, unsure whether to speak. He didn't greet her, didn't ask her to sit, just looked at her, his eyes slow but sharp. "Carl told me you visited him," Arthur finally said. "I just wanted to help," she replied softly. He nodded. "No cameras there. I only knew because he called me. Said an angel came to his door." Emily smiled faintly, unsure what to say. Arthur leaned forward. "I've built a life watching people perform for money, but you act when there's no reward in sight. That's rare." Still, Emily didn't know what he wanted, why he was telling her this. "Do you know what it means to be seen?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "It's everything." He gestured to a chair, finally. Then sit. I want to tell you something about me, about why you're here. As she sat across from him, a strange feeling settled over her, like she was on the edge of a cliff, about to see something breathtaking or terrifying. And without another word, Arthur began to tell her a story, one that would shift the ground beneath her feet forever. Arthur's voice was low, the kind that carried weight, not from volume, but from memory. The fireplace crackled softly behind him as he looked past Emily, as though seeing a life that no longer belonged to him. I wasn't always rich, he began. In fact, I came from less than you. Emily sat still, listening closely. There was no arrogance in his tone, no bitterness, just truth. I was raised by a single mother in a one-bedroom apartment in Detroit, he continued. She worked in a laundromat, 6 days a week, never complained. We had nothing, but she had pride, dignity, the kind you can't teach. He paused, then looked directly at her. You remind me of her. The words caught Emily off guard. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She didn't know what to say to that, to being compared to someone who had clearly shaped this man's soul. Arthur leaned back. When I started this company, I was still scrubbing floors. I was young, broke, and invisible. Just like you. He explained how he'd worked nights, built a delivery service by hand, failed 3 times, and slept in the back of his car for a year before anyone took him seriously. What kept me going wasn't ambition. It was remembering how she looked every morning. Exhausted, but alive. He reached for a small photo frame beside him and handed it to Emily. Inside was a faded picture of a woman with strong eyes and a warm smile, standing outside a laundromat with a laundry basket in hand. She looked ordinary, but her presence was undeniable. She died before I made my first million, he said softly. Never saw any of this. Never saw who I became. Emily held the photo gently, her chest tightening. Arthur continued. People think success is about brilliance, but it's not. It's about heart. And you, Emily, have that in a way most people never will. She looked up, tears pricking her eyes. I don't want you to work for me, he said suddenly. I want to help you build something of your own. But you need to trust me. You need to believe that your story isn't over. Her voice finally broke free. Why me? He smiled faintly. Because no one ever chose me. And I promised myself if I ever made it, I'd choose someone. The room was silent again, heavy with emotion. And in that silence, a bond formed, not between a CEO and a girl from nowhere, but between 2 souls who knew what it meant to be unseen. Emily barely slept that night. Her mind couldn't keep up with her heart. The conversation with Arthur Whitmore played over and over like a film reel stuck on a loop. His story, his mother, his offer. It didn't feel real. People like her didn't just get chosen by billionaires. But the next morning, a black car pulled up outside her building. The driver handed her an envelope with her name written in perfect cursive. Inside, wear something comfortable. No uniforms today. AW. She had only 2 decent outfits to choose from, both second-hand. She picked the one with the fewest wrinkles and stepped into the car, unsure where it would take her. 40 minutes later, the vehicle stopped in front of a modest but charming storefront, boarded up, dusty, with faded paint and cracked windows. A for sale sign leaned crookedly in the window. Waiting on the sidewalk was Arthur, leaning on a cane, dressed not in his usual suit, but in a cardigan and soft slacks. He looked almost gentle. This, he said, gesturing to the building, was once a bakery. I used to buy day-old bread here for 15 cents when I was your age. Emily looked at it, confused. Why bring me here? He handed her a folder. Inside were blueprints, permits, and a proposal with her name printed neatly at the top. Emily Carter, sole proprietor. I'm giving this to you, he said, to start something of your own, a business, a future. Her breath caught. I don't know anything about running a business. You know about struggle, he replied. You know about kindness. That's more than half the battle. It felt like a dream, like she was floating, but her feet were still firmly on the cracked concrete. Arthur turned to face her directly. I'll pay for the renovations, I'll guide you through the start, but this place, it'll be yours. Fully. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. Why are you doing this? He smiled, but there was sadness behind it. Because I'm running out of time, and I want to see one more story start before mine ends. Emily didn't know what to say. No one had ever given her anything, not even a chance, let alone a legacy. She didn't know how to thank him. But she knew one thing with absolute clarity. She wasn't going to waste this gift. It didn't take long for the news to spread. Arthur Whitmore's children, 3 of them, each more polished and prideful than the last, found out about the deed transfer within 48 hours. And they were furious. Not just annoyed, not concerned, furious. How dare he, hissed Victoria Whitmore, the eldest, pacing in heels across her penthouse floor. Giving away property to some janitor? She's not even family, barked Thomas, the youngest. This is insanity. Dad's losing it. Michael, the middle child and the quietest, said nothing, but even his silence cracked with tension. The 3 of them gathered at the Whitmore estate that same evening, storming into their father's private study like executives in a hostile takeover. Arthur was calm, almost amused. You're angry, he said, not looking up from his book. I expected that. Victoria stepped forward, eyes blazing. You gave her a building, Dad. A building that should have gone to us. It wasn't about ownership, he said, placing a bookmark slowly. It was about vision, something none of you have shown me in years. Thomas laughed bitterly. Vision? She's a nobody. She's what you used to be before you started counting zeros instead of values, Arthur replied sharply. The air went cold. She's stealing from this family, Victoria said, her voice trembling, and we're not going to let her. Arthur stood, slower than before, but tall with dignity. You'll let her, or I'll take you out of the will. That stopped them. Not because they feared the loss, but because they finally realized he was serious. Dead serious. Outside, Emily had no idea what was coming. She was at the bakery, sweeping out old dust and peeling faded wallpaper, dreaming about what kind of shop she could turn it into, a coffee place maybe, or a homey little cafe for people like her. She didn't see the black SUV that parked across the street. She didn't know the man watching her from the back seat had been hired by Thomas. And she didn't hear the whispered plans forming over expensive wine and pure entitlement. To discredit her, to drag her name through the mud, to take everything Arthur had given her and leave her with nothing. Because while Arthur had chosen her, his children were ready to destroy her. Arthur's health declined faster than anyone expected. The day after his confrontation with his children, he collapsed in his study. The doctors called it a cardiac episode, stress-induced, irreversible. He was stable, but weak, and he knew the clock was ticking. From his hospital bed, surrounded by monitors and silence, he asked for one visitor. Just one. Emily. When she arrived, her eyes wide with worry, he smiled faintly. Don't cry, he whispered. This is just the last chapter, not the end of the book. She sat beside him, her hands trembling in her lap. They're coming after me, she said. Your children. They've been following me, digging into my life. I think they're planning something. Arthur nodded. I know. They always did hate when I thought for myself. I don't want to be the reason your family breaks apart. He reached over, his hand frail but warm. "You're not the reason. You're the reminder of who I was, who I should have stayed." There was a long pause before he continued, his voice lower now. "I've rewritten the will." Emily looked up, shocked. "I left them plenty," he said. "They won't starve. But the bakery, and something else, something bigger, I've left to you." She shook her head, unable to believe what she was hearing. "Arthur, I can't—" "You already did," he interrupted, "by showing up in the rain, by showing up every day since. I've made more money than any man needs. But you showed me what it means to live." His breathing grew shallow, but his eyes remained clear. "My final wish is that you don't run, that you don't let them turn you bitter. This world needs people like you." She nodded slowly, tears finally spilling over. "I'll stay," she whispered. "I promise." He smiled. Then everything was worth it. He closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to rest. Peacefully, purposefully. And just like that, the man who built an empire with his hands left the rest of his legacy in the hands of someone who had nothing, but gave everything. The reading of Arthur Whitmore's will was scheduled for a rainy Thursday morning, fitting somehow. The sky wept as if mourning with those gathered inside the mahogany-paneled law office. The Whitmore children arrived first, dressed in black, dripping in grief, or the performance of it. Emily came last, sitting quietly in the back, unsure why she had even been invited. The lawyer, a stern man named Harris, opened the folder and cleared his throat. "This will is dated and signed 10 days before Mr. Whitmore's passing, with full legal authority. You may wish to remain calm throughout." That warning should have been enough. It wasn't. Arthur's voice played from a recording, crackly and slow, but unmistakably him. "If you're hearing this, I've moved on. Hopefully, peacefully. I've divided my wealth in a way I believe reflects my values, not my bloodlines." Thomas shifted uncomfortably. Victoria crossed her arms. Michael simply stared forward. "To my children, you've known privilege your entire lives. I gave you more than I had, and in doing so, perhaps I took from you the hunger to understand what truly matters. You each will receive a trust of $5 million. Use it wisely, toi, or not. I've seen what money does in careless hands." Gasps echoed softly in the room. $5 million was far less than expected. Then the recording continued. "To Emily Carter, the woman who reminded me what humility looks like, I leave not only the bakery, fully paid and titled, but also controlling shares in Whitmore Holdings Community Initiatives Division. You'll oversee it. You'll guide it. You'll decide where the heart of this company beats next." The room exploded. "She's a stranger," Victoria shouted. "This is ridiculous," Thomas roared, standing up. But the lawyer lifted a hand, and Arthur's voice spoke one last time. "I chose Emily because she chose kindness when no one was watching, because she didn't ask for anything but gave everything. She is what I once was, and everything I wish this family still could be." The recording ended. Silence took over. Emily sat frozen, heart pounding. She'd walked through rain, doubt, humiliation. And now, she held the keys to a future not just for herself, but for others. Outside, the storm began to clear. She stood up, not with pride, but with purpose, and walked out of the room, head held high. And for the first time, the world turned to watch her. Emily Carter never asked for fortune. All she wanted was a chance. She walked through storms, real and metaphorical, and in doing so, touched the life of a man who had forgotten where he came from. And maybe that's the most powerful kind of love story, not one built on romance, but on recognition. When one soul sees another and says, "I remember you. I was you." But now I ask you, what would you do if life gave you just one shot to change everything? Would you walk through the storm or turn back? Drop a comment below. Do you think Arthur's children deserved more, or did Emily earn it? Let's talk about it. And hey, if this story moved you even a little, consider leaving a super thanks. Your financial support helps this channel reach more people and keeps these stories alive. Every bit of help makes a big difference. Don't forget to subscribe and tap the bell so you never miss a single one of our stories. And now, click the video that's appearing on your screen right now to watch another powerful story that will leave you speechless. You won't want to miss it.